Hello and welcome back to the KCC channel. I'm Rob and it's a special day today because we got a shout out in one of the stories on Reddit. So today we're jumping back into the Kevin in a Big Rig series from the Stories About Kevin subreddit, brought to us by the Reddit user StrongBad Jr. Now the shout out for KCC doesn't come until part 5, but we have to read part 4 first, so let's get right into that. Here is Kevin in a Big Rig part 4, First Kevin Gets Lost, OP Gets an Idea. Let's jump right in. Hello everyone and welcome back to yet another installment of the series Kevin in a Big Rig. Once again, I'd like to thank everyone who has read my previous episodes and shown more interest and support than I could have ever hoped for. I know a lot of you have been asking questions about how First Kevin got away with his stupidity and why I didn't do anything about it. I apologize for not answering many of you outright, but I can promise that I fully intend to answer all of your questions in upcoming posts. I can assure you that it will all be worth it. Now, without further ado, on to part 4, First Kevin Gets Lost, OP Gets an Idea. Backstory: this story takes place a few weeks after the truck heater snafu. While I would like to say that First Kevin learned from his mistakes and tried to do better, it would be more accurate to say that he merely doubled down on his brain-dead antics. In the interim, his driving skills plateaued at noob level, his navigation ability was at potato, and his superiority complex had gone from annoying to insufferable. Despite everything, I was still very much a rookie driver, a peon in a very big company, and, most importantly, more broke than MC Hammer. I was afraid that doing anything to rock the boat with management would lead to me being fired, in future debt, and my truck driving career at an end. To add some perspective to my situation during this, I should mention more about the contract I had in place with the company at the time. In exchange for free training, I had agreed to work for the company for 8 months. If I quit or was terminated for any reason before that contract was fulfilled, I would be liable for over $6,000 in tuition fees. Furthermore, since the company owned the training facility at which I trained, they could refuse to release my CDL school records to any prospective employers unless they bought the contract. Since most reputable employers required proof of completion of a CDL school and were unwilling to make such an investment in a relatively inexperienced driver, I was stuck and pretty much at their mercy. This is the dark truth that many supercarriers such as Swift, Werner, and CRST will not tell you when they promise you a rewarding career and free training. In short, I was pretty much powerless, but that was about to change, and in some strange way, I have First Kevin to thank for that. The morning on which this story takes place started out like pretty much every other day for the past 2 months. First Kevin finished his shift, and me waking up to see what kind of fresh hell of a mess I had to sort out. The day before, we had picked up a load in Pennsylvania, with me doing the initial pickup. I had gotten us just across the state line into Ohio before going off duty. Just before picking up said load, I had filled the fuel tanks completely and burned maybe a quarter of a tank before going off duty. The next fuel stop was in less than 400 miles. We had more than enough fuel to get there. Again, First Kevin had ended his shift with no clue where we were. No surprise there. A quick look out of the window. Oh, we're on the shoulder of a highway? What a completely unexpected and unprecedented development. Yawn. Fine, let's get this over with. By this point, I had already purchased my own truck-enabled GPS. First Kevin, apparently upset that I didn't recognize his obviously superior ability, had thrown a tantrum and demanded I no longer use his GPS because he would work out the route. Yeah, right. He gets out of the driver's seat and, like the petulant man-child he was, he took his GPS from the mount. A trick I learned from my trainer was, when using a GPS, was to enter the departure and destination, and then add each assigned fuel stop in order as waypoints in the route. This forced the GPS to stay on the company route 90% of the time. Also, our fuel payment cards would only work at the assigned fuel stops, so it made life easier just to follow it. Having to get fuel elsewhere needed a valid reason, assistance from dispatch, and often carried a lecture about the importance of the company-assigned route. I had tried to teach this trick to First Kevin, but because he had so much more experience than I did, a full month, he felt he didn't need to listen to me. This, of course, was routine, as First Kevin never had any clue where we were. I had already familiarized myself with the route and knew which highways, towns, and cities I could use to help get my bearings. This time, however, I was completely stumped. I had expected that first Kevin would have gotten at least halfway into Illinois, but the GPS had us in some small town in Indiana. Also, it wasn't a town I had seen on either the GPS route or the paper map I routinely used to verify the GPS. Okay, that was odd. I look again at the GPS for a highway number or street name. Again, nothing it showed me made any sense. I go back to the navigation page where it showed the distance to the next checkpoint, which would have been our next fuel stop. It didn't make sense either, as it was showing close to 500 miles to go to the first fuel stop, not the second. It had to be a mistake, I think, since there was no way to be further from the fuel stop than when I went off duty, was there? I sit in the driver's seat for about 5 minutes, trying to make sense of what the GPS is telling me. I had almost convinced myself that the GPS didn't log us reaching the fuel stop and was trying to backtrack. I was about to force it to reroute to the second fuel stop when I, by chance, happened to check the fuel gauge and my bottom jaw hit the floorboard. Where once the needle had been just above the 3/4 line, it was now showing less than quarter of a tank. By my estimates, that was good for about 100 miles safely. Something was very, very wrong. First Kevin, where the hell are we? I asked, knowing it was in vain. I don't know, he replied testily. He had been growing more indignant ever since the heater fiasco. Did you get to the first fuel stop? No. Did you get lost again? He didn't respond right away. I was following the company route, he finally replied proudly. Bullcrap, because we are very low on fuel and further away from the fuel stop than when you started. He looked stunned. Apparently, he hadn't realized that fact. I turned back to my GPS and take a look at the map, and everything became clear. We were way off course, about 300 miles from the interstate we were supposed to be on. I didn't know how, but we were well and truly lost. Lost, low on fuel, in the Midwest, and well into the wintertime. F my life. I decided to abandon getting back on the assigned route. First Kevin had wasted his entire shift with his unplanned detour, and I didn't want to make the situation even worse. I tell the GPS to search for nearby truck stops. It takes a few moments, but the patron saint of truckers had not abandoned me. There was a Flying J truck stop less than 20 miles away. I tell the GPS to take me there and send an urgent message to dispatch. I tell them we need our fuel card unlocked for that location, and we are dangerously low on fuel. To my surprise, First Kevin did not like this idea. We have to stick to the company route. If we run out of fuel, it's the company's fault. Company route? I scoff. You got us lost again. You have no idea where we are again. I have to spend half my day correcting your F-ups again. Right now, the company route doesn't mean a damn thing because I have no clue where we are. What I do know is we need fuel and now. First Kevin starts sulking. Well, if we get in trouble, it's on you. Fine by me, I reply, and get us going. My reasoning is that if I run out of fuel at the truck stop after requesting the fuel cards open, dispatch would have to explain why they didn't allow it. Running a semi out of fuel requires some very expensive emergency road service. However, if I run out of fuel while going down the highway, I'll have to explain to dispatch, the safety department, and the highway patrol as to why I couldn't read a fuel gauge. I decided to minimize my responsibility and at least get somewhere where fuel was available. The last thing I wanted to do was repeat what happened in that dealership parking lot. About a half hour later, we get to the truck stop. It's early morning, so several other trucks are already refueling and we have to wait in line. I checked the computer and, to my surprise, dispatch approved fuel purchase, but was concerned as to how we got so far off course. I replied that I just came on duty and First Kevin was the one who got lost again. I didn't expect anything of this since the night shift dispatchers didn't handle things like employee discipline or service records. When the time comes, I top off the tanks, almost 150 gallons of diesel, and try to figure out what I can do to get us back on track. After driving about 5 hours, I finally get us back on course and decide to take my legally required break. As I go to put myself off duty, I notice an important message has come from dispatch. It's from my fleet manager, roughly equivalent to a supervisor. "Call me ASAP" was all it said. Oh great, I say. I take my phone, step out of the truck, and make the call. "What are you two doing? How did you end up so far off your route? Did you follow the route we gave you?" "What do you mean, fleet manager?" "Well, first Kevin says you've been ignoring the company routes. That's why you've been getting lost." That explains it. First Kevin, the little weasel, sent her a text message with some made-up story. My blood started to boil. "Fleet manager, first of all, I have no clue what happened. When I finished my shift yesterday afternoon, everything was fine. We were on course and had plenty of fuel. I woke up this morning on the side of a 2-lane highway in the middle of BFI with no clue how I got there, and running on fumes. That's why I sent the message to have the fuel cards opened." "Well, you two are a team, so you have to work together." I take a deep breath, fighting back the urge to launch into a verbal tirade that would surely get me fired. "Fleet manager, you know what First Kevin is like." "Well, just figure it out." She hangs up, and I have to fight the urge to throw my phone across the parking lot. A short time later, I return to the truck and make ready to head back out. First Kevin is sitting in the passenger seat, his precious notebook in hand. He's trying to hide a crap-eating grin on his face, but his 1970s porn star mustache gives it away. "So," he said, "you gonna follow the company route? You're a company driver, so you gotta follow the company route." He then hands me his notebook, open to the page he had written down the route. I take it and throw it in the back. "Listen to me, craphead. You're not my boss. You're not my trainer. I don't take orders from you. From now on, I'll drive the truck my way, you drive it yours. Unless it's an emergency, keep your mouth shut." For a moment, he looks terrified, then petulant as he goes back to the bunk. Good riddance. For the rest of the day, I go through everything that happened over the past 2 months. When I think that, after all the times I had to babysit a supposedly more experienced partner, I get blamed for everything going wrong, I just get more and more upset. But since I'm a broke newbie driver under a hobbling contract and no support from anyone, what can I do? I need to get away from this clown. But how? If only there was some way I can prove he's effing up. I'm just a truck driver. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't always a truck driver. Before I started driving, I was a manager at a steel mill. I was an engineer by trade, and my previous job had me dealing with safety and environmental regulations, quality control, OSHA, DOT, and, my least favorite, corporate bureaucracy. Corporation. The company I was driving for was a corporation, with a hierarchy of increasingly incompetent managers, VPs, and directors who will be slow to take responsibility, but first to demand someone else do so. However, I happen to know how to get their attention: documentation. But what I need was something to document. Cue my other valuable skill set: investigation. Part of my old job had been to investigate accidents, chemical spills, defective products, etc., and find out what happened, why it happened, and how to prevent it in the future. In doing this, I learned that the more details you gather, the better. Dates, times, names of witnesses, photos, video, ambient air temperature, tea price in Bangladesh. If it was even remotely relevant, write it down. Best of all, I was really good at it, often finding problems everyone else overlooked. So the two pieces of a plan begin to form. First off, I would need to observe everything First Kevin did and said, looking for something I could use to prove just how incompetent he truly was. In addition, every time he got lost or went off route, I would take a picture with my phone of the truck's computer logs, showing the GPS pings and their timestamps, along with a photo of his daily driver log. First Kevin would be under investigation and not even know it. I finish my drive shift and go off duty. Before I go to sleep, I decide to check the computer records to see exactly what First Kevin did the night before that got us so very lost. According to the GPS pings, he had, for some reason, turned off the interstate and driven close to 500 miles, with over 150 miles going in the opposite that we needed to go. I took snapshots of the ping and First Kevin driver logs, showing that he was on duty when it happened. But that wouldn't be enough. I knew I needed more, much more. So I took an old legal pad and began making a list of everything stupid, dangerous, and dim-witted thing First Kevin had done, including dates and times where I could, and started writing an email that would take a month to complete. And that's where I'm going to end part 4. But not to worry everyone, this story isn't even close to being over yet. Thank you to everyone for reading this far and for the continued support and encouragement. I hope you have enjoyed the series this far and you find these tales, if not informative or enlightening, then at the very least entertaining. And stay tuned, part 5 will be released shortly. Spoiler alert, we learn part of the reason why First Kevin is such a Kevin. I have to admit, these stories are making me a little more hesitant to drive down the highway in my car beside all those semi-trucks. I didn't realize how many incompetent drivers there may be on the road. It just baffles me that people can be that incompetent but are still allowed behind the wheel. Now, if I'm afraid to be on the highway beside one of these trucks, I can't even imagine what it would be like to be the co-driver in this case. OP, you must have some balls of steel. Do me a quick favor, have a look down below the video. If that subscribe button's still red, it means you're not actually subscribed to the KCC channel. Please hit that subscribe button for more daily Reddit stories. Well, now it's time to make my anxiety on the road even worse. Here is Kevin in a Big Rig Part 5, Shutdown. Let's jump right in. Welcome back everyone to another installment of the Kevin in a Big Rig series. I apologize for the delay, as I know many of you have been anxiously awaiting Part 5. However, the day after Part 4 posted, and I sat down to make this update, I learned from another Reddit user that YouTube creator Karma Comet Chameleon, hey that's me, had picked up my stories for a series of videos on his channel. Upon hearing this, I was completely taken aback, as I never imagined this series would be worth such an effort. That being said, it took a little time to process. If you haven't seen his video, I'll include a link to the video below where he covers part 1 to 3. Quick note, part 1 to 3 is linked at the top of the description down below. I know how much work and time goes into making a video for YouTube, and I feel the least I can do to repay the favor is to get the word out there. Well, thank you OP, I very much so appreciate that. So without further ado, let's get into part 5, Shutdown. Backstory. This story takes place only a few days after the events in part 4. First Kevin and I were heading towards Salt Lake City, but the winter weather that had been slowly ramping up for the past month was only getting worse. We had been fortunate up to this point that the snow and ice hadn't caused any delays, but luck was about to run out. This story begins one night in North Platte, Nebraska, on Interstate 80. First Kevin, having driven the day shift, had parked the truck and we changed places. Believe it or not, I sure as hell didn't. First Kevin had actually learned from me and decided to not only stop in a safe place, but at our designated fuel stop. That meant we could get food, fuel, and do a truck inspection. This was one of the few times First Kevin made a rational decision. While First Kevin went into the truck stop, I refueled and inspected the truck. After making sure the truck was in good shape, I take a look at the weather. A massive winter storm had been building up, and all predictions put it and us on a collision course. The company's safety department had sent several weather alerts and issued a few restrictions. My personal rule is that shutting down early is more preferable to shutting down too late. I discovered that Wyoming, the next state we were to cross into, was taking a serious pounding from the storm, and several accidents were already being reported. Thank God it was my shift this time, or First Kevin would have wadded the truck and us into a tight little ball in a ditch. I knew we wouldn't make much progress, but since the roads were still dry and the snow wasn't yet falling, I figured I would be able to make it close to Wyoming before shutting down, let the storm pass, and continue on once the roads were clear. I had driven this route many times by this point and knew the best places to be stuck. I set the GPS to take us to a truck stop just past the Wyoming state line, go inside for a quick bite, and we head out. It wasn't long before the leading edge of the storm had caught us. The further along I drove, the worse the weather deteriorated. Snow flurries melted on the highway, only to be frozen by the rapidly decreasing temperature, and larger, heavier snow began sticking to the road. In typical fashion for the safety department, their weather alerts were about 2 hours behind, and where they had issued orders to slow down or shut down were for areas well inside the storm. According to them, we could drive the speed limit and they wouldn't say anything. Unfortunately, I knew better than to trust the judgment of someone nearly 1,000 miles away about the weather I was looking at through the windshield. I had made it about 100 miles when conditions forced my hand. I had already had to reduce speed to barely creeping, and the road was invisible beneath the snow. After watching another truck who was driving way too fast lose control and end up in the ditch, I made the call to shut down. I pull into a rather large truck stop not far from the Wyoming state line. By this point, the snow was so deep the trailer bumper was acting like a snowplow and the tires were having trouble gaining traction. I finally get the truck parked and tell dispatch we're shut down. As I set the truck's idle control system, first Kevin wakes up and asks, "Are we still in Indiana?" In case you're not familiar with US geography, Indiana is a very long way from Wyoming. We hadn't been there for days. "We're in Big Spring and we're shut down. We're gonna be here for a while," I tell him. "Did safety tell us to? I made the call. It's gotten pretty bad." He mumbles that he will get us going once his 10-hour break is up, but I know safety will issue a shutdown, albeit later than it should be. I grab a snack, pull the bunk privacy curtains closed, and settle in. I decide to make use of the downtime to work on Operation Ditch the Dipshit. For the past couple of days, I had been writing down everything I could remember since day one with First Kevin. I jot down everything, major and minor, along with dates, times, and locations. Every missed turn, unnecessary detour, and violation First Kevin had made goes on the list. My plan was to copy it all to email, but I wanted to make sure nothing was left out. While First Kevin was asleep, I decided to go through the truck's computer records. I start by going through First Kevin's hours of service log. This is a legally required record that shows what a driver does every single day. Since drivers can only drive a set number of hours per day, any violation would show on the log. Best of all, these computer logs couldn't be tampered with. Every time he drove longer than he should have, I made a note. The computer also keeps a record of abnormal truck activities. One of these is called hard braking event. A hard braking event is, as the name suggests, an instance where the truck experiences excessive braking. Remember how I said First Kevin was heavy on the brakes? Well, the computer agreed. There were dozens, if not hundreds of these records filed during his drive shifts. To be clear, it takes a very hard brake check to trip one of these events. I use my phone to snap a quick photo of the computer screen. I make my notes and climb back into my bunk for the rest of the night. The next morning, I wake up and go to the front of the cab and check the computer for messages. As I predicted, safety had issued a mandatory shutdown for all trucks in our area. Just as well, otherwise I'd have to duct tape First Kevin to his bunk to keep him from trying to leave. The storm was still dumping snow, and the paved parking lot of the truck stop is packed full of trucks, and the interstate visible from our parking spot is dead quiet. No one was going anywhere. Despite this, I breathe a sigh of relief. First Kevin might be stupid, but his sycophant attitude meant he wouldn't dare defy the company. We were safe for the time being. First Kevin wakes up a little while later. "Are we still in Illinois?" he asks. "No," I reply cautiously. "We're in Nebraska, close to Wyoming. Safety has us shut down." "Oh," he replies and goes back to the bunk. It was then that I knew something about First Kevin was off, more so than I thought. Twice in less than 12 hours, he has forgotten where we are. Indiana and Illinois are behind us by a few days at this point. There's no way he could be that confused. I try to put it out of my mind for the time being and decide to brave the weather in the interest of breakfast. I grab some food and coffee and check the weather conditions to the west. Wyoming DOT had shut down the entire interstate, and over 200 accidents had been reported in the past 24 hours. I talked to a few drivers who had come in from the west, and their accounts match the reports. It's pretty clear that we're not going anywhere soon. After about an hour, I head back out to the truck and decide to catch up on some sleep. First Kevin is fully awake at this point, messing around with the computer. As I climb inside, he asks, "Are we still in Illinois?" What? He still doesn't know where we are? "No," I explain, "we're in Nebraska. We got here last night and haven't been in Illinois for 3 days. You don't remember?" This was the question that answered far more than I thought. First Kevin explained to me that about a year before, he had been involved in a serious car accident, one of many. According to him, he ran off the road at high speed. He was hospitalized with a shattered leg, his bad leg now, and was in a coma for 21 days. His doctor told him that being in a coma that long would likely cause some brain damage, and it had. He had difficulty with his short-term memory and would literally forget something he did 5 minutes before. This wasn't entirely news to me, as he had told this story before. In fact, he had told me countless times over the past 2 months, and it was always the same: bad car accident, 21-day coma, and busted leg. Right, I replied. Well, the weather is pretty bad, so get comfortable. We're gonna be here for a while. I then climbed back into my bunk. First Kevin, citing his bad leg, wants to try and find a parking spot closer to the store, but I tell him the lot is completely full, and if he moves the truck, we could lose this spot. Reluctantly, he decides to stay put. In my bunk, I go over First Kevin's story: 21-day coma, short-term memory loss, numerous car accidents. If I was asked to pick a person to deny a CDL, it would be First Kevin, and not because of the hell I had already been through because of him. Driving a truck is dangerous at the best of times. Add a brain-damaged driver and the risk increases exponentially. I knew that this company literally hired anyone who gave them a phone call, but what doctor in his right mind would grant someone with brain damage a DOT medical card? I pull out my notes and jot down First Kevin's story as he told it. Later that day, First Kevin wakes up from a nap. I'm in my bunk and he asks again, "Are we in Illinois?" I sigh, defeated. "No, First Kevin, we're in Nebraska. You've asked that 3 times already." "Oh, well, I have bad short-term memory. See, I was in a car wreck," and he repeats the same story again, practically word for word. "Did safety shut us down?" he asked. "Yes, so did Wyoming DOT, I explain." "Oh, okay." He goes quiet again. We end up stuck for 2 full days waiting for the road conditions to clear. By late morning on the 3rd day, we received word that the road conditions have improved to the point where we can proceed. By that point, First Kevin had repeated his story another 3 times. Each time, he was completely unaware he had told it earlier. By this point, I've decided there is something seriously wrong with this guy, and he is a danger to himself and anyone sharing a highway with him. I didn't know if I can get him off the road at that point, but I knew I could get reassigned. Our unexpected downtime had given me time to work out my exit strategy. I volunteered to take the first shift. I figure if the roads are iffy, I have the better chance of getting through it safely. This was a good call on my part, as I counted no fewer than 20 accident sites in the first 50 miles. Many of these still hadn't been cleared, and the vehicles were left in the ditch or median. I managed to get a good distance into Wyoming before needing to swap with First Kevin. The weather had broken and everything between us and Salt Lake City was clear. As First Kevin started his shift, everything that occurred during our shutdown replayed in my mind. The more I thought about it, the more it bothered me. First Kevin wasn't just stupid, he was a ticking time bomb. It was time to get as far away from him as I could. Before I went to sleep, I take out my notes and cell phone and begin composing an email. I address it to my fleet manager and CC the safety director. It would take a while to finish, as I planned to make sure they knew everything I had seen and experienced over the past 2 months. Given the nature of corporate politics, I expected to encounter some resistance and being ignored, but that was fine. It would only make the situation worse for them in the long run. And with that, part 5 comes to an end. I know there wasn't much in the way of Kevin-type behavior in this one, but I hope that you at least have a better idea of the kind of person First Kevin was. In the next episode, First Kevin's terrible driving will do actual damage to the truck, and my plan to get rid of him will be fleshed out. Again, a big thank you to everyone for your kind words of encouragement and support. I'd also like to say a special thank you to everyone who gave my post gifts. If you haven't already, please check out the video by YouTube creator Karma Comment Chameleon. His telling of these stories is far better than anything I could do myself. And if you're wondering, he's not paying me for this plug, laugh out loud. Until next time, my friends, please remember, keep all Kevins at a safe distance and away from sharp objects, heavy machinery, and flammable substances. Well, OP, I mentioned at the end of Update 4 that I was a little apprehensive about getting on the highway now with all of the incompetent drivers in the trucks, but now after reading this one, I just don't want to go anywhere near the highway. It's not a question of being apprehensive, it's a question of, you can't make me. Thank you for the shout out you gave my channel in part 5, and thank you so much for writing wonderful stories that a lot of people are really enjoying. And now, a call to action for all of the KCC viewers who have made it this far in the video. I've linked both of these stories, part 4 and part 5, in the description down below. Let's all go to part 5 and comment on that story, how much we appreciate OP's writing, and how wonderful these stories are. Let's show OP Strong Bad Jr. a little love from the KCC community. Once again, thanks for watching, have a wonderful day, and we'll see you again tomorrow.